Hello and welcome to another Quaran-Stream that is going on at the moment. My name is Josh Sim, your head of sport. We are back again, and albeit you'll notice we are pre-recorded, and the reason for that is because of just circumstances this week have just made it quite difficult to go live. So we've decided that we still wanted to do an episode. So here we are. We're pre-recording this. This will be up later on Saturday evening, hopefully. But yeah, of course, there's a lot of football news to talk about, which is, exciting as usual. It's been another jam-packed week of action. And it'll be interesting to see what happened. We've got Premier League coming up in the midweek again, after what's probably been one of the longest game weeks of the season, which started last week when you think about it. And yeah, it should be very interesting stuff. Obviously, things to note, obviously in the video description, in the link, but there'll be links to our social media down below. You can obviously subscribe to the channel as well if you want to know when you'll get when the live streams will be happening and get notifications for that and sort of watch along live. And yes, you can watch on Wednesday. Myself and Curtis Long did a special sort of NFL focused Raw Sport Weekly where we talked about the playoffs and the off season activity that's going on at the moment. So if you're an NFL fan or someone who just wants to know what's going on in the playoffs or something, I recommend checking that out. We sort of broke it down as detailed as possible. But with that, I will introduce my guests that are here with me. Here come, and the first one obviously being the sport department deputy, and Wi-Fi issues prevented him from talking about United last weekend. I'm sure he's got plenty to say this weekend, given the results, both United's and the results around United as well. I've got Ben Parkinson with me. Ben, how are you?
Hi, Josh. Yeah, very well, thank you. Wi-Fi issues did prevent me from my opinions, so I will be sharing a lot of opinions this week.
Yeah, it's exciting time for United, and think we'll see. We'll see what happens with. Big FA Cup tie. We'll hopefully get down to talking to, and then obviously midweek action as well, and we'll see if United is still sort of up in there by the end of the week. And with yourself, we've also got the editor of the sports section editor from the Boar, who admirably filled in last week when internet issues kept me out of the stream. Luke James joins us. Luke, how are you?
I'm good. How are you both?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad, and hoping for a more tech sound stream than last week, obviously. But nonetheless, there's been a lot of action to talk about, and I feel like we will start with, and people will notice, we started going more topic heavy rather than games heavy, because it feels like a more logical way of doing this. And I suppose the biggest topic that was happening on Thursday night was Liverpool's defeat to Burnley. That feels like, and it was interesting watching the discourse on Twitter, because, and obviously Twitter being the sort of measuring stick of football discourse, there was obviously the Liverpool fans who fretted that this could be all over and their sort of invincibility period had come to an end. Then there were the non-Liverpool fans who just reveled in their defeat as well. But they hadn't lost a game at Anfield since 2017, and here came Burnley, and the team everyone thought was going to knock the streak off, obviously, and happened to do so. Let's start. I'll start with you, Ben. Putting your United loyalties aside, this was a result that you couldn't have thought would happen. But given Liverpool's form at the moment, it does feel like there's something happening. Something's not quite right at the moment.
Yeah, no, completely. It was an absolute shock of a result. I think Liverpool have looked weak over the past couple of weeks. So, but I don't think anyone expected really Burnley to go to Liverpool and get that result. But the thing that's most concerning about it, I think, is Liverpool's performances. It looks like, a loss of hunger, a desire. In both the Burnley and the Man United game that I watched closely, you see the likes of Salah and Mane. They're on the edge of the box. They can take a man on. They can take the likes of Luke Shaw on. And instead, they're just passing it sideways. They're not taking a shot, not taking a chance of getting that ricochet and getting that deflection in or anything like that. It just seems a lack of ruthlessness that we associate with Liverpool over the past couple of years. There's been the defensive issues that are quite obvious, but I think the real problem that's arose from them is actually moving those midfield players out of midfield and back into defence. The midfield has looked nothing like what it's looked over the past couple of years. I mean, you've taken Jordan Henderson and Fabinho out. You've taken these two engines, two players who box-to-box players. They run all day. They're ruthless. They're aggressive in there. And, the likes of Thiago. Thiago was brought into that Liverpool midfield to provide something different. He could spray a ball. He could add a bit of flair in there, stuff like that. But they've actually lost what their core values were in that midfield of aggression, winning the ball back and just constantly running. And I think that's the real issue with them. And you ask the question, can they still mount the title challenge? And you think, you can't rule them out in a season that's unbelievably unpredictable. But I mean, they're going to have to do well over the next few fixtures, and it's a tough run that they've got. But it's quite surreal to think this is supposedly Liverpool's best ever team, and they're being this poor and uncharacteristically this poor. So I think it really did send shockwaves throughout the league, and I think they're looking very vulnerable at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, it's not. They achieved incredible highs in 2020. I don't know if anyone anticipated a downturn. I don't want to call it a downturn because obviously football being so fickle, in a month's time they could go on a winning streak and suddenly they'll be back again. But look, it is quite remarkable. I mean, this team, obviously, we know of the defensive injuries. We know they've been hampered by them severely. So much so that, the tendency now is to play their central midfield, arguably their better defensive midfield pairing, or one of them in Fabinho or Jordan Henderson, who's currently injured, at the centre-back role. But it's the attack and the lack of fluidity that's sort of concerning at the moment. Obviously, Mo Salah, Roberto Firmino, we know despite his qualities that he obviously brings, he is quite streaky in front of goal. He'll either go on a goal streak or a barren spell. Mo Salah is suddenly kind of hit that barren spell. Sadio Mane arguably as well. Is it a case of teams are now figuring out how to defend against that front three better, or is it just final ball mistakes being made by Liverpool themselves?
I would say it's a mixture of both. I think, and again, kind of the example against Burnley this week, Trent Alexander total 18 from open play. He completed one of them, and that was from a set piece. And kind of what you're talking about there, Josh, kind of with Liverpool being worked out and the players not delivering, I think both are true. I think since the Atletico Madrid game at Anfield last year, Liverpool have struggled against teams that play in a deep block because teams have worked out how to stop kind of people like Mo Salah, people like Sadio Mane breaking in behind. And when you add that kind of tactical issue together with some players just not performing where you'd expect them to be, then you reach a scenario where kind of you are going to struggle in terms of creative output. And again, I think Alexander-Arnold's probably the clearest example of this, because he's not actually doing that many things differently. I mean, his pass accuracy is down, stuff like that is like a little bit worse than previously, but he's still trying the same things. They're just not working this year. So in terms of kind of why it's gone wrong for Liverpool, remove kind of personnel issues, I think it is just a case that they have been worked out. There tends not to be a plan B from Jurgen Klopp. It tends to be very much, this is how we play, this is how we're going to break teams down, and it will work or it won't. And the other thing to point out is that people just aren't delivering. And what you see quite often in the Premier League in particular is that you'll have a top six team in crisis, so to speak. And normally that will be because kind of the top striker or the top forward isn't delivering. For Liverpool, it's all three. Mane, Salah and Firmino haven't looked great since kind of the middle of December. And I think that's a huge issue for them. So going forwards, Jurgen Klopp needs to bring back the atmosphere that we'd seen previously at Liverpool. And I think unless your team was directly involved in the in a title race against Liverpool, I think Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool were quite easy to like, in the sense that kind of Jurgen Klopp's popular manager, they were playing nice football, this kind of stuff. And now the atmosphere is really soured, and Liverpool aren't that same kind of upbeat club, the team that people kind of want to see do well. And I think Jurgen Klopp and his players, to a certain degree, aren't really dealing with being favourites particularly well. And I think this year they were favourites, even though, of course, it's a bizarre season in itself. But going forward, yeah, I think Liverpool have a number of issues that they need to tackle, and they need to do it soon, because if this continues for much longer, they will be kind of in serious trouble.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I'll ask you another question on this. Do you think, it doesn't look like they're going to go into the market for a central defender? They might, but it doesn't look like it so far. Do you think that will be the decider of potentially not being able to get a 1-2 finish?
Yeah, and they should have done it on January the 1st. This is the thing that really surprised me about Liverpool, because they've earned so much praise for recruiting the right players at the right time at the right prices. And it was clear for months, kind of since Virgil van Dijk, Joe Gomez were injured, it was clear that they needed more depth in that area, because they're relying on guys that they ordinarily wouldn't play. I mean, kind of someone like Nathan Phillips isn't a Jurgen Klopp style defender, and I think it says a lot that he's kind of making Premier League appearances at the minute. And that's not to criticise him, because he's a young player trying to make a name for himself. But what it does say is that Liverpool don't have the right kind of squad depth. They need an extra player who Klopp really does trust to play in central defence. So yeah, I think it doesn't look like they are going to sign a centre-back, and I think that will be why they don't win the title, if kind of that is the case.
Yeah, no, very, very tough run of fixtures coming for Liverpool as well. So they are looking a little bit in trouble. But I guess moving on to sort of another midweek fixture, obviously Leicester beat Chelsea 2-0. Which was a very, very good performance by Leicester and quite underwhelming for Chelsea. So, I guess, what do you make of Leicester at the moment? Do you think they are the real deal? Can they go on and really maybe mount a title challenge or top 4 challenge?
I think top 4 challenge, yes. Title challenge, no. And I think perhaps it's just I'm a little bit hungover after last season with what happened to Leicester, because they were so good for most of the year. Of course, lockdown contributed to this, but they came back afterwards and they were pretty poor, and they put together quite a bad run. So I think in terms of a race for a top 4, they're definitely in amongst it. I think kind of in terms of the individual players they've got, they're all of that quality. They're like in and around the top 4, definitely, if not Europa League quality for sure. And they're all playing together really well. And I think the only issue that could possibly come for Leicester is the same one that happened last year. So at this time last year, you had people like Jamie Vardy, James Maddison delivering kind of substantially above their expected goals. And it's the same this year. I saw a stat earlier today where James Maddison is, I think, 340% above his expected goals. He was expected to score, I think, 1.3, and he's currently on 6th for the season. So that suggests that he probably can't continue to score at the same rate. And if he doesn't, then that's a fair number of goals that Leicester aren't going to score. So title race, probably not, because I think it will catch up with them. Champions League qualification, quite possibly.
Yeah, no, I think I agree, because I think I've looked at, Leicester's recruitment, and of course, I think probably they're one of the league's best recruiters, but they still just lack a little bit of squad depth in places. You just think there's a few key players who could get injured, and then I think that will leave them in a bit of a struggling situation. So, yeah, no, I think I agree with you there on the top 4 challenge. Looking at the other side, then you're looking at Chelsea, and this just is not looking good at all for Frank Lampard, is it? Do you think they need to act now and sack him, or are they going to have to wait?
I don't think they should have appointed him in the first place, so my answer is probably a little bit skewed. I think Lampard has a lot of really good players at his disposal, and he's just not getting the most out of them. And there was some really laughable things on social media this week about how people like Kai Havertz had kind of down tools and how they weren't particularly interested in playing for Lampard. I don't think that's true. I just don't think they're gelling as a team. I don't think they're going in the right direction to do so. I think a lot of the time in football, we talk about the process and we talk about how kind of it takes a number of years to get to where you want to be. But if you look at the players that Chelsea bought this year and kind of the cost of the players that Chelsea bought this year, both in terms of wages and transfer spend, they're kind of in, if not win now mode, they're kind of a year away from that. So they need to be better than they are. And I think the biggest issue that I have with Lampard is that he doesn't seem to want to use the players like Timo Werner, like Kai Havertz, in their best role or system. So Kai Havertz was excellent at Leverkusen because he was involved in the team that kind of liked to press from the front and was quick in the transition. Timo Werner was kind of very similar at RB Leipzig. And Chelsea don't really do either of those things. And I think that is ultimately either really poor recruitment from Chelsea for not bringing in the people that Frank Lampard wants, or really bad management from Frank Lampard because he doesn't know that those players aren't good at the things that he wants to do. So either way, they've got the wires crossed, and I think they need to come to some sort of solution. I'd be interested to kind of hear from you, though, like who would replace Lampard if he was to go in the middle of the season, because I think that's why he'll probably end up staying.
Yeah, I think it's definitely difficult because, you think about actually what would happen if a new manager was appointed. And I think, boards and clubs will be much more hesitant on this year because, so first of all, you have the cost of paying off Frank Lampard whilst you obviously sack him. Then you have to pay for the contract of the new manager. Then the next summer, you have to back the new manager with that money. And that is already on top of all the money that has already been spent on Frank Lampard's wages and the team investment. So it's a lot of money. And even for someone like Roman Abramovich, I think that is, that's definitely going to cause hesitation in making a decision. You talk about the likes of, Thomas Tuchel and Allegri who are available. But, I think one important thing to note is, and Sam Allardyce, I know, spoke about this at West Brom, because of the fixture congestion, there's actually a limited amount of time on the training pitch to implement your ideas. And I think, the only reason I could see you appointing someone else is if you think, okay, look, maybe they can get top 4 this season and then build from the next season. But, part of me almost thinks that, will a manager have enough time with the fixture congestion, and will they be able to do that? So I think that's definitely going to be a problem for Chelsea managers or Frank Lampard and the board. So, yeah, the thing is with Frank Lampard, in my opinion on it, I question his defensive coaching. There are still multiple basic errors that go on. I mean, you look at the goal against Leicester with James Maddison, the second goal there, and it was a simple ball over the top. I mean, Reece James, I don't know what he was doing, because you learn in the under-7s that you track your man goal side coming back, and he failed to do that. And I think, that was really, really quite detrimental to the result in the end. So, I think that's a problem of Chelsea, because it seems that, whatever their combination of defenders, whether it be Zuma, Thiago Silva, Rudiger, who, some of these defenders are players who were already there before Lampard and played very well. And unfortunately, they just weren't not able to get the best out of them. And I think partly it's down to Lampard and his coaching team's coaching abilities there. All right, yeah.
Hello. No, I'm back. I am back. I was just listening to your discussion on Chelsea, actually. And Luke, you made the good point about Havertz and Werner not being playing their best positions. I know different clubs have different recruitment models. Obviously, teams now rely on a director of football or a scouting team a lot more than the manager's sort of choices, I guess. I mean, Jurgen Klopp, we talked about Liverpool earlier. Jurgen Klopp made a hint this week that, he's not in charge of recruitment. Ultimately, it boils down to Michael Edwards and the board and Mike Gordon, the chairman of the club. With Chelsea, one can't help but wonder if Lampard is fully in charge of decisions of transfer business, and whether, I posed this question to you guys. Do you feel like it was a case of Chelsea kind of making moves above him? Marina, I never am able to pronounce her last name, but Marina, the director of football there. Is it a case of they made decisions to sign these players and then kind of, did Lampard have a chance to kind of have it? Do you reckon Lampard had a chance of say in their recruitment? Do you think he scouted them? Do you Luke? I mean, it does feel like as though they've kind of gone, here's some players now, put them together and try find a mix for them. Do you sort of agree that it does feel a bit scatterbrained at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the thing that happened at Chelsea, kind of, in my view, I think that there's two possible outcomes. Number one, kind of, Lampard was offered these players by his board. Kind of, the board were aware that they were available, they're good players, so they went out and signed them. and they went to Lampard and said, "Do you want Timo Werner and Kai Havertz?" And he probably said yes because they're great players. But just because they're great players isn't necessarily a reason to buy them. Like, we've seen really good players play for clubs and do terribly. Like, Angel Di Maria wasn't a good fit at Manchester United under Jose Mourinho. So there needs to be some joint-up thinking there. And I think that's a big issue at Chelsea. There doesn't seem to be that joint-up thinking kind of through the levels of the club. And it's not even like I'm proposing that teams should have this kind of old-fashioned kind of one person as your manager and that person kind of do everything. I'm not proposing that at all. I think some of the teams that are most effective in the transfer market are clubs like kind of RB Salzburg, RB Leipzig, out and do things like structure. So like football or chief soccer operationals, we want to call them these days, kind of to have their jobs and for that to work. But I think there needs to be joint up thinking. And I think another issue that we kind of have at the minute in terms of managers is that kind of there was a report in The Athletic this week saying that the next Chelsea manager, whoever that might be, was probably going to be a German speaker. And I think the reason why Lampard is probably going to make it to the end of the season this year is the same reason why Dortmund are currently having to go with the guy who was previously the assistant manager to Slavan Bilic, kind of until the end of the season. The people, kind of the main German speaking managers who you might want to hire simply aren't available at the moment. So in terms of the future for Chelsea, I think Lampard is probably there to the end of the season, which gives him the opportunity either to get this right or for Chelsea to really decide, well, no, this just isn't going to work.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I haven't directly read that report from The Athletic, though, but it is interesting that they are looking at a German-speaking manager. Obviously, Thomas Tuchel was sort of the favourite. I've seen there's been transfer insiders in Germany saying that he's the number one pick at the moment. You've obviously got Julian Nagelsmann's obviously a long-term target of them if he wanted to leave RB Leipzig, which I don't know if he does at the moment, but we'll see. Ben, I did want to, and you know, people might say, "Oh, you're bringing the conversation to Manchester United," but I do want to ask, because you've seen United's recruiting strategy has changed. They're targeting young players, but it does feel like there's a sort of purpose behind who they're targeting, with Amad Diallo recently and Palestri as well from Uruguay. Are you encouraged by comparison? I mean, I guess looking at comparing the two recruitment models of Chelsea and United, are you encouraged that it does feel like, you know, if it's Ed Woodward, I'm not sure. I don't know who is in charge of United scouting, but does it feel like there's a bit more purpose to who they're going for, and sort of a strategy that certainly feels more complementary to Ole than Chelsea's does to Lampard at the moment?
Yeah, no, I definitely think so, 100%. I think, you know, the thing is, I always think in my mind it's just a personal preference. Going for young players can sometimes just be a win-win, whether they perform for you or you get a bigger sell-on value. It's a win-win. So, and that's Man United's, you know, DNA, really working with young players. So I think that, no, it's definitely great to see for Manchester United. And I think it's nice because there just hasn't been a recruitment strategy, I think, for the last 7 years, really. So it's nice to see that there might be one now, because, you know, we've seen the likes of Radamel Falcao on loan, Angel Di Maria, Memphis Depay, you know, all these transfers not working out. And it's almost just like they just go and kind of splash the cash on anyone. It's like, right, who's available? And then we'll see if we can get them. That's not a recruitment strategy. And, you know, and we paid the price for that over the past 7 years. It now looks like we've got a recruitment strategy, and we're looking strong, you know, not only in the league, but sort of externally as a club. There's good vibes around Manchester United at the moment. Regarding Chelsea's recruitment, you know, I completely agree with what Luke said, and I kind of sum it up as trophy shopping. They just went out and bought the big names, the big stars, and all of that stuff. Whereas, you know, you look at who I think the two best recruiters of the league are: Liverpool and Leicester. And I think, you know, look at Leicester. They found Wesley Fofana. What a talent he is. You know, Liverpool, they didn't spend they bought Diogo Jota, and he looks incredible. Looks, you know, if any one of that front three leaves in the next couple of years, they've got Diogo Jota there to replace them, and he looks insane. So I think that, you know, they're the recruitment strategies that you kind of want to model off, but Chelsea seem to have gone for the big names. It just seems maybe too many big names. Even Thiago Silva, you know, I think a fantastic defender, but he's 36 years old. Is that really a recruitment strategy plan? I'm not sure. So I don't know. I'm a bit unconvinced by Chelsea's recruitment. You know, we've seen in the past, though, they are capable of building a team for a manager and winning the league. We've seen it happen before, you know, particularly with Jose Mourinho. So it'll be interesting to see. But the whole Frank Lampard era was supposed to be this kind of breath of fresh air, focusing on the young players and the young talent. And, he almost is it's almost to the point where he might even have to go back to the young talent again, because these new players aren't working who he's brought in. And, I think, listen to Luke say earlier about Liverpool, how it's baffling to have, all four kind of front men not really firing or not working. It's the same with Chelsea in the sense that it's not just Timo Werner who's not firing. It's not just Kai Havertz who's not firing. Hakim Ziyech has been in poor form. Christian Pulisic, I know he was the year before, but he's not been in good form. It's just all of them just don't seem to be in good form. And I think actually the only Chelsea in form player is probably Mason Mount. So I think that says something about it as well. There's it's a tough year when recruiting players because of COVID, not being able to travel back and see your family, or even just kind of immerse yourself in the community around you. So it's a tough year, yeah, but I still just think, Lampard's surely got to be getting more out of these players. They're talented. They're talented players. No one denies that. And right now, they're not performing how we all expected them to.
Yeah, it does feel like, and I totally get your point. And if we were to believe every player, if we were to believe every media report, they're apparently looking at David Alaba, they're apparently looking at Dayo Upamecano. But again, these are names that are just being, they are obviously highly touted names and names that a lot of teams are chasing, but it does feel like Chelsea are just targeting them for the sake of targeting them. It doesn't feel like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like there's a strategy involved. Of course, an interesting story was that they let Fikayo Tomori go to AC Milan, and he's going on a loan. But we know there's a buy option on the Italian side, but on the Rossoneri's side, they can buy him for 30 million euros, and that transfer will be done permanently. It's not. I don't think it's going to be an earth-shaking move for Chelsea. But just quickly, Luke, it is surprising. To me, it was surprising. How surprising was this to you that they were willing to let one of their young centre-back options go to AC Milan, who granted are very much building an exciting team for the future, but letting him go nonetheless seems like a very peculiar decision, given, as Ben has talked about, Thiago Silva is not exactly young at the moment, and neither are there other options right now.
I'm not surprised in the sense that it happened. I think it was kind of inevitable, but I am surprised that Chelsea were willing to go through with this in the first place, because there were reports in the summer that Tomori was linked with West Ham and would have gone to West Ham had he agreed to kind of go there on loan, but he said no, he wanted to stay and fight for his place at Stamford Bridge. So it leads me to think that kind of this is just an example where the manager doesn't really rate the player particularly highly, which is a really strange way for Chelsea to act about this, because if Lampard isn't in the job for long, and it's fair to kind of refer to the fact that the shelf life of a Chelsea manager isn't particularly long kind of often, so it seems odd that you would kind of loan out a player with an option to buy who could go on to be kind of the future of your kind of defensive setup at the club. And I do think it's a little bit short-sighted from Chelsea in that sense. From Tomori, I think it's a good move for him if he does get football. Of course, it's a completely different atmosphere at AC Milan at the moment. They're top of Serie A, they're playing some great football, and they've got lots of kind of, like at Chelsea to be fair, veteran figures around him who we can learn from. He'll be playing alongside Mandzukic, who's just signed, of course, Ibrahimovic too. So yeah, it's an interesting transfer. Doesn't make much sense for Chelsea, especially when we look kind of 18 months into the future. But for him personally, I think, yeah, go and play some football in Italy and see how it goes.
Yeah, Ben, I just want to get your thoughts on it as well. This is someone who was potentially, I don't know if he was pushing for the England setup, but certainly a young centre-back who could be in an England team a few years into the future, who knows. And again, someone Lampard really seemed to trust and rely on last season. What are your thoughts on his move to AC Milan and what it does on either side, for Chelsea side and for the players side as well?
Yeah, I was really surprised because, last season he was clearly trusted by Lampard to come in and do a job, and then I think the season before that as well, he was actually at Derby on loan with Lampard. So, I thought this is going to be a player like Mason Mount, who he almost treats as like a kind of father football figure. and trust him. And I think he has immense potential as well. I always think with these centre backs, if they have a natural ability, speed, power, and sort of can play out from the back as well, as we know Tomori can play right back or left back. So I thought he had everything he needed, and then can learn mentally at a club like Chelsea, a top Premier League club, learn from the veterans around him. I thought it was, a fantastic prospect that Chelsea have to keep hold of. In my mind, there's no reason why Tomori, if he was playing, couldn't be as good as Joe Gomez over the past season. I thought he has everything capable of doing that. So I can't see why Chelsea would want to let him go. I do think for him it will be a good move. I think as long as he can get some playing time, then I think it will be a good move. But I think Chelsea could regret that in the future. I think what it does is it probably, the likes of Manchester United, Arsenal, Liverpool, any of the other top Premier League sides, maybe think in a couple of years' time they can bring him back to England, and so he can play for them now. That's the advantage I can think of that deal there, because I think Chelsea are missing out. It's not the first time we've seen them let go of Lukaku or De Bruyne or Salah. We've seen it before, so I think they're definitely gonna regret this one. I think, Tomori will be a top centre back in the future.
I agree, and I think kind of the interesting thing as well about the Tomori situation and why I think it's so short-sighted is the fact that, you only have to look as far as Manchester to see a centre-back who previously wasn't fancied by a manager and is now starring and is perhaps kind of on the way back into the English national team. So John Stones is a great example of that. So I find it really weird that Lampard has given up on Tomori, and it does feel like that. As you said, he was kind of a key part of his plans at Derby, a key part of his plans in his first season at Chelsea, and now he's just nowhere to be seen. So I don't really understand why there have been moves since the summer to try and loan out Tomori or try to sell Tomori. Perhaps they do want to kind of bring in another centre-back who's perhaps a better fit for now. But I do think it's short-sighted.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely is a baffling one. I guess if we go sort of across to North London with transfers, and Arsenal obviously heavily rumoured to be in the offer for Martin Odegaard over the past couple of hours. So if that one goes through, do you think that's a good move for Arsenal?
That's a great move. A really, really good move for Arsenal. I think he's a player that just needs to play football. And again, I think kind of to shift this to Real Madrid perspective for a minute, the way that Zidane has treated that situation is almost as ridiculous as the way that Lampard has treated Tomori this season, because Zidane said kind of to Odegaard at the start of the season, look, I want you to stay at Real Madrid. I want you to be part of the team, etc., etc., etc. I don't want you to go on loan. Get halfway through the season, he's played, I think, 4 out this year, and now he's going out on loan anyway. So I think any team kind of in and around the Europa League or Champions League will be lucky to have Odegaard. And Arsenal, I think, are particularly lucky because he was so good at Real Sociedad last year. And no disrespect to Arsenal, but if I was a player of that quality, kind of on that trajectory, they probably wouldn't be my first choice. I think I'd either want to stay in Spain, where he currently is, or perhaps go to Germany and go to a team where you're kind of guaranteed those minutes. And I think at Arsenal, it's an interesting challenge, especially kind of hoping to fill the void left by Mesut Ozil. But I think it's a coup for Arsenal. I honestly do think it's a coup for Arsenal, because you've got a player who will be so highly motivated for the next 6 months to make a huge impact in the Premier League. And if Zidane is still there at the end of the season, which I doubt, then perhaps it could become a permanent move to England. I think that's an exciting transfer for kind of everyone involved.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think the question that's arising from this is Emil Smith-Rowe. He's been in absolutely fantastic form and obviously plays a similar position. So I wonder how they're going to fit together. But then I think, Martin Odegaard, he's unbelievably versatile. See him play out on the right, see him play deep in midfield role, see him play more advanced midfield role. There's no reason to me why you can't get them both in the same team, especially with Emil Smith-Rowe's work rate. So I think, that will be exciting. I think really there's not been too much that's gone on in the transfer window. Of course, Amad Diallo to Manchester United looks exciting. Hopefully making his debut soon. We'll see about that. But unless you have anything else on any other transfers, Luke.
There's one, again, I'm going to bang the MLS drum. Jordan Morris has officially gone to Swansea on loan for the rest of the season, with perhaps a deal to make that permanent at the end of the year. I think it's a great move for Jordan Morris. I think it's a great move for MLS. I think it's a great move for the Seattle Sounders. and it's obviously a great move for Swansea as well. Kind of Morris is a player who can play up front or can play on the wing. He's quick, he's good in front of goal. He can hold up the ball pretty well. I think he's someone who could potentially prove to be quite an under-the-radar signing for Swansea. So, yeah, I think it's a really good transfer for them. And the fact that they play two up front means that Morris will probably get to play up front as a central striker, which he hasn't been able to do recently in MLS. So, in terms of Morris's push to kind of be a mainstay in the US men's national team, it's a good transfer. And he has a big opportunity now, especially with MLS potentially not starting the new season until kind of later in the year. So, yeah, it's a good transfer for all involved, and that's something that I'm genuinely quite excited to see go forward.
Right, so I guess moving on now to another probably topic at the moment over the past few days, in the injury to Kevin De Bruyne for Manchester City. Now, we spoke a little bit about John Stones and Ruben Dias, that partnership I know was mentioned last week. So, how much of a miss is De Bruyne going to be for Manchester City, particularly as obviously they just started to hit some really good form?
I mean, it's a huge miss. For me, he's probably the best by a distance. So it's a big loss for Pep Guardiola. I think the only positive that City can really take out of this is it Phil Foden simply has to be on the pitch more, and I think that's really good for development. And I think it's for City because he's on a really good run anyway. I think the reports are saying it's going to be around kind of 4 weeks to 6 weeks that De Bruyne is out. So given the fixture congestion, that is obviously a big problem for them. But yeah, I think if Aguero is back soon after his coronavirus positive, I think that will also be a big boost for them, because obviously De Bruyne has been playing across a number of different positions this season. It will be interesting though, because obviously we've seen Liverpool, is this the injury that perhaps Manchester City into a crisis? I doubt it, because I think they're a little bit more of what that kind of do, but it'd be interesting kind of over the weeks.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I think the question is, I think for City, the ongoing one's been, even if De Bruyne was fit, is about the striker situation. Erling Haaland's been mentioned, Lautaro Martinez last summer, a lot's been mentioned there. Do you think this is going to be an issue that they should dip in the January transfer market, or do you think they wait till the summer? Obviously the Haaland's release clause will be activated at some point soon. So, do you think that that's something that City need to address right away if they're going to mount the title challenge this season, or something they can be more patient on?
To be honest, I think they'll probably wait until the summer, because kind of players that City will be targeting aren't likely to move in January, and if they do move, it will be way above their kind of true market value. So yeah, I think they'll probably wait. I think the only issue for Man City is Sergio Aguero's fitness, and of course Gabriel Jesus' fitness as well. If they're both relatively fit and can play enough games between now and the end of the season, I doubt it'll be a problem, because they've got kind of people like Mahrez, people like Raheem Sterling. If they are without De Bruyne or Aguero, Jesus for a sustained period of time could be a problem. But I don't think with 8 days left of the transfer window, they're about to break the bank on someone like Haaland, simply because, I mean, even set against the backdrop of the coronavirus, I think it's going to be really tricky for a team to step out there and spend over 100 million, you'd imagine, on someone like Haaland at the minute. I think it's not something City need to do. I don't think it's a risk they need to take, because Guardiola's probably looking at the league right now and thinking, yeah, we can probably beat most of the teams in and around us kind of towards the stretch, towards the end of the season. So no, I don't think it's something they'll want to commit to.
Yeah, and would you say that they are title contenders? We know they have a game in hand. If they win that, they will be top. So, in my mind, I know I sort of consider them as in the controlling seat of the title race. So, would you say, especially if Liverpool go on a bad run of form, they'll be favourites over the likes of Manchester United or any of the other title contenders?
Definitely. I mean, just looking at the table now, kind of they've won the last 5. They're on a plus 18 goal difference, which is the highest in the league. Kind of to compare, Manchester United are on plus 11 goal difference, Leicester on plus 14, Tottenham on plus 16. And I think City just have that air about them. And there was actually some interesting reporting on kind of the BBC's football podcast yesterday on Friday that was talking about Manchester United kind of having that swagger about them again, with people like Paul Pogba playing well, Bruno Fernandes, of course, playing well as well. I think Manchester City have slipped under the radar this season simply because they've played less games kind of for most of the year. Of course, they started a week later with Manchester United as well. So, yeah, they've been really impressive. They've not scored as many as they usually would. They've scored 31, conceded 13. But the fact that they've conceded 13 in a season like this is really impressive. So, yeah, for me, they're probably title favourites. And I think it's probably theirs to lose, especially if they can beat Manchester United when they next play them, can beat Liverpool when they next play them. I think they'll be the deciding games.
Yeah, I think that's the thing for Manchester United as well. Any fans like myself that I've spoken to, none of us actually expect to win the league. I think it's more of just kind of finding it funny, the fact that we're above Liverpool and Manchester City at the moment, and looking at the comical side. But, you know, Manchester United midweek obviously beat Fulham 2-1 at Craven Cottage. So that was quite a significant result. I mean, what a fantastic strike by Paul Pogba. That definitely deserves a mention. And, you know, I think that's the thing. The good thing about what's happened with Manchester United is that, you know, you've seen Bruno Fernandes, by his standards, have a little bit of a dip in form, and Paul Pogba's really stepped up. And I think it's credit to them, and it's credit to Manchester United. You have two players who, you know, if one of them is sort of, you know, off the boil a little bit, then the other one can take control. And I think that's, you know, that's a real positive for Manchester United. But, you know, I just wanted to get your opinion on this, someone else's. Do you think there's going to be a dip in form, or do you think they'll be title contenders the whole way? Is top four a certainty, or could they dip and even fall out of there?
Is that Man City or United?
Manchester United.
No, I think Manchester United are comfortably top four this year. I think for me, the ones that I'd be certain about are City because they're so good, Liverpool because they've got, for me, the best manager in the league and a very good squad, and they've got to get better from here. I can't see how they get worse, which suggests they should be fine. And United are the three that I'm comfortable in making kind of the top four. I think Manchester United are really interesting because they seem to be happy again. And I think it's been a very long time since you've looked at a Manchester United team and gone kind of, yeah, they kind of are feeling themselves right now. And so I support West Ham, to be transparent. And I'm looking at kind of the fifth or sixth round or whatever round it is of the FA Cup, where West Ham will play either Liverpool or Manchester United. And I think I'd actually prefer West Ham to play Liverpool. And it's been a very, very long time that I would have preferred not to have played Manchester United than, say, Liverpool or someone else like that. So, yeah, I think the mood around Manchester United has changed. I think Solskjaer is starting to look quite competent, and I don't think that's been the case before. I think people have kind of looked at Manchester United and gone, yeah, well, they're just having a purple patch. So one of my friends who supports Liverpool, whenever United put together a couple of good results, he's like, well, it will end soon enough. And I think this is the first time really that United do look, I don't think they look like they're going to win the title, but I think they're comfortably good enough for the Champions League this year. Yeah,
no, I can definitely comfortably say that I am probably the happiest I've been in the last 7 years with Manchester United's team and results. Obviously, you mentioned a West Ham fan there, and I mean, they've been in fine form, obviously beating West Brom and Burnley. So, I mean, you must be happy with that. And what do you think the club's aims will be for the rest of this season and top half finish?
The club's aims for West Ham are always the same. It's always not to get relegated. So, no, I'm not that optimistic about West Ham, to be honest. I think I'm writing an article about this at the minute. I've been writing the article for about a year. It's taken me forever. But, I mean, West Ham are doing really well. And David Moyes has got them playing together well in this 4-2-3-1 that they're using at the moment. The issue is that West Ham have one centre-forward, that's Mikel Antonio, and he's very injury-prone. I love Mikel Antonio, but he is kind of made of glass. And then we've got one backup central midfielder in Mark Noble. Again, I love Mark Noble for everything I've got, but he's 33 and way kind of over the hill at this point. So if kind of Declan Rice was to get injured, if Mikel Antonio was to get injured, the wheels would fall off quite quickly. And if you look at the results, like, yeah, we've had decent results against Burnley. I think that was a 1-0 against West Brom. I think that was a 2-1. It's not been particularly convincing, though. there have been times when we probably would have hoped to have scored more or been a little bit more convincing. So yeah, I think West Ham are doing fine. We're currently winning 3-0 against Doncaster and look really, really good, to be honest. It is against Doncaster. But yeah, I think West Ham should finish top half this year. Very much contingent upon injuries and whether or not they sign a backup for Antonio, because selling Haller at the start of the month, that was why I was so concerned about selling Haller. Not because he was setting the world on fire under David Moyes, because he wasn't. Simply because I didn't trust the board to sign someone to replace him. There was talk about Patson Daka and a couple of players from Ligue 1 who potentially could join West Ham on a permanent transfer this January. And now the discourse in the media is talking about potential loan moves. And now we're kind of 7-8 days away from the end of the transfer window and no one has arrived. It's been 17 days since we sold Haller. And that's why I'm always a little bit skeptical about West Ham, because we can look great and then we could lose 4 games on the bounce against Sheffield United. So anything could happen. But yeah, I think I'm content. I'm definitely content.
Yeah, no, I think, not to worry you too much. I think obviously getting a striker in this window is definitely necessary, or you might see David Moyes' results of what he did with Fellaini, but stick Souček up front for a couple of games, but I'm not sure how that would end up going. But I guess looking at the bottom of the table, I mean, West Brom, a 3-2 win over Wolves, and obviously Wolves are struggling a bit at the moment. I mean, that's got to be a massive win for them. Do you see them, with Big Sam staying up now?
No, I don't think West Brom are good enough to stay up. I think they lack depth. I think if any of their kind of main players were to get injured, Pereira being kind of the top example of that, I think they would be in a lot of trouble. And I think if you compare them to the teams above them, I think Fulham are a better team. I think Brighton are a better team. I think Burnley are a better team. I think Newcastle are quite worrying, but they're probably a better team player for player as well. So it will take a huge achievement from Sam Allardyce to guide them out of trouble. And it's not impossible because he's done it with teams like Sunderland anyway. But yeah, West Brom wouldn't be the team out of the current bottom 3 that I'd predict to stay up. That would be Fulham. What do you make of kind of West Brom at the minute?
Yeah, I think when I looked at them, I looked at their recruitment in the summer, and while you say they did buy and they did spend money, it was actually just turning loan moves into permanent moves, which to keep you up in the Premier League, frantically, it isn't going to be good enough. So I think that's the problem there. I don't think no one can ever rule out Sam Allardyce because he's, like you said, he's done it before. But I think, yeah, it's one of those cases where the squad, I think, is generally just weaker than a lot of the other teams you're competing with, because the likes of Fulham have been actually hitting form in this new system. I know they lost in midweek to Manchester United and they lost to Chelsea, but the performances they put in were actually, I think, incredibly encouraging, and they actually maybe deserved a point from both of those 2 games. So yeah, I think that's where I think West Brom are at. I mean, you mentioned Newcastle there. I mean, beaten by Arsenal 3-0 midweek, not looking good for them. I mean, Steve Bruce comes out and says, it's time to do it my way now. I mean, does that just not leave Newcastle fans just wondering, well, what have you been doing for the past year then?
Yeah, Steve Bruce has made some really worrying comments over the past week or so, because he came out, I think it was last weekend, and said something along the lines of, well, people didn't want me to have the job from the start. Kind of, I would imagine referencing someone like Alan Shearer, I think was who he was getting at with that. And he's had a huge chip on his shoulder about not having the support kind of from the fan base. And there was something I saw on social media where basically he says this kind of thing all the time. Like all the clubs he's managed, he's accused the fans of being quote unquote hysterical. And he said that about Newcastle fans recently as well. And speaking as someone who is very familiar with watching their team play horrific football under a manager that no one likes, I kind of understand why Newcastle fans are coming from on this. And I understand why they're so concerned, because Newcastle made a really good start to this season. They were, I think, 10th at one stage. I think they were in the top half at one stage. So that was fine. That's okay. But the thing is, the wheels fall off very, very quickly. They're now they've only got 1 point from the last 5 games. They're on 19 points at the moment, and they're on a -12 goal difference. That's the same goal difference as Fulham. Of course, they're above them in the standings on points, but it's pretty easy to see where this all goes wrong for them. And I think the issue with Steve Bruce, as you kind of touched on, if he hasn't been doing it his way for the past 18 months, what has he been doing? And why has he just been kind of relying on the foundations left by Rafa Benitez? Of course, Benitez has just left his job in China today as well, which I thought was quite interesting. But yeah, I think Newcastle are a weird team because they made some really good signings in the summer. You looked at the signing like Wilson, kind of people like that. You looked at them and you said, yeah, they're pretty decent signings. But they are so defensive. And I'll compare it to, I think it was the second season West Ham were in the Premier League under Sam Allardyce, where they were brilliant. It was the front three of Diafra Sakho, Enner Valencia, and they were playing Stuart Downing as the number 10 in like a 4-3-1-2 system. And it was great until Christmas. And I remember we beat Manchester City in October and everyone got very, very excited. And that was the season Sakho, I think, scored like 8 or 9 games in a row. Anyway, got after Christmas. Kevin Nolan returned to full fitness. We switched back to the 4-5-1, and it was terrible. West Ham won, I think, twice in the last 19 games of the season, and everyone was really confused about why West Ham fans wanted him to go. West Ham were like adamant that we really wanted rid of Sam Allardyce. And everyone was like, well, what do you expect? Kind of your West Ham, it should just be enough to stay alive. So I completely get where Newcastle fans are coming from when they see their team dipping and dipping and dipping in the standings. And people say, well, it's Newcastle, what do you expect? I think there are valid reasons to complain. I think Steve Bruce needs to get the chip off his shoulder because he's a Premier League manager. He's in a very privileged position and he needs to make the most of this. Like, Newcastle have some really good players. And at the minute, I think they're really quite badly under-delivering. I don't think 15th in the standings is terrible for them, but kind of 19 points from 18 games, they could be doing more. And I think that's why Newcastle fans are so frustrated.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I remember before analysing Newcastle's recruitment saying it's actually probably one of the best Premier League clubs in the league, looking at how they, capitalised on Bournemouth being relegated, Norwich with Jamal Lewis. So there was a bunch of deals there that I thought were really good. I guess looking at the FA Cup, that's happened today, the notable fixture obviously that I watched, Southampton versus Arsenal. Obviously Arsenal, the holders of the FA Cup, are now knocked out by Southampton. Now, I don't know, looking at this game, I wasn't sure what to make of it. So I sort of just went with the conclusion that Arsenal are just not as good as Southampton, and that's in the coaching and the players they have. What do you make of that result?
I've only seen the goal, so I didn't watch the full match. But I think Southampton definitely have a better coach. I think player-wise, Arsenal should be stronger, but this year it's just not really happened for them. The coaching at Southampton's brilliant, and I think what Southampton have proven is that you can have a director of football and you can kind of build players through the system, and it can work with a joint up thinking at the top. Whereas Arsenal, I mean, there's talk about trusting the process at Arsenal, but I'm not really sure what the process is. This example, again, the game today, is just where Hassan Hüttel stuck to his guns, has played his preferred system, his preferred players, and they've come out and had a really good result. I think Southampton are dangerous in the Premier League too. I think they're a team that will probably finish above West Ham, for example. I think Southampton are more of the real deal than a team like West Ham are. And yeah, they've got exciting players like James Ward-Prowse is very, very good. I think he should probably be in the England team somewhere, kind of definitely more consistently anyway. The issue for Southampton, like many teams, is just kind of if they pick up a lot of injuries, they'd be in big trouble, especially if it's someone like Danny Ings again. So yeah, a great result for Southampton. I don't think it's the worst result in the world for Arsenal because it gives them more time to focus on the Premier League, which is where they should be focusing their energies. But yeah, I think Arsenal are an interesting team this year because they have lots of really good players and they have a manager who everyone thought was kind of going to be the second coming of Pep Guardiola, but it's not quite happened for them. What do you think of Arsenal kind of in 2021?
I think they look like they've improved, but I'm still just not sure it's enough. I think there's got to be a couple of names that just need to, I think, cut your losses and go. For example, I'm not a Granit Xhaka fan at all, so I think he needs to be gone. And I think they do need to still have a clear out. Mikel Arteta, I had, like you said, better expectations for him. When that actually happened, I was a little bit jealous because I was like, okay, Man United are here with Solskjaer and you've got Arteta, and I think Arteta has much more potential, but it's not actually worked that way out so far. The interesting thing that I was going to note about the fixture, obviously Southampton versus Arsenal, that's the next fixture in the league, the exact same that's coming this week. So I think that's going to be a test for Arsenal again. You know, they're gonna be facing a team they've just faced, and I think that's going to test the coaching. You know, can the coaches sit there and identify what went wrong in this match today, and can they therefore, you know, form a game plan to go and strike back? And I think that will really be how you assess Arsenal's coaching. You know, Arsenal as, you know, the team of character. Do they have the character to come and bounce back against the team they just lost against? Because I think if Southampton win again, I think it's like just there in the clear, you know, clear writing. They're not as good as Southampton. It's as simple as that. So I think that would be interesting to see midweek what happens there with Southampton and Arsenal. I guess the big game in the FA Cup really this weekend is another fixture that's just recently happened: Manchester United versus Liverpool. Would you say this is a second chance for Man United to sort of capitalise on Liverpool?
Yeah, I think United are favourites for this. There was an interview with, I think it was Gary Lineker and Bruno Fernandes that I listened to earlier today, where kind of Fernandes was asked, are Manchester United the favourites for this, kind of considering you've just beat Liverpool? And his answer was no, because they're both brilliant teams. And of course, that's brilliant PR and the correct answer from that perspective. In terms of factual analysis, I think Manchester United should win this game. If Manchester United don't win this game, it will either be a failure on the part of the players selected, or it will be because Solskjaer has rotated too much. Liverpool are there for the taking because they've had so many injuries. I mean, we've seen Liverpool play lots of youth players in normal matches. And I think Liverpool aren't likely to rotate because they played Aston Villa kind of under 18s in the third round and put out a pretty much full strength team. So yeah, I think United should win. Liverpool, I think it would do them good if they lost in some respects. But it's just a case of who turns up on the day. And kind of if you've got people like Salah playing, there's always a chance that he does turn up and does have a very, very good day indeed. What kind of team are you expecting Solskjaer to put out tomorrow?
I'm not too sure. I'm expecting a little bit of rotation. I'd love to see the new signing on the bench, Amad Diallo, because I think it is a cup game and it is at home as well. So obviously that limits travelling. So I think I'd like to see that. I'd like to see Donny van de Beek start. Don't think it's going to happen, but I'd like to see it. I expect a little bit of rotation. I think Marcus Rashford was rested midweek, so I think he should come back into the fold for this lineup. Edison Cavani has to start for me. I think there was a major issue in the first game with Marcus Rashford being offside. I think it was actually a ridiculous amount of times he was offside, and I think that Liverpool, Cavani's movement, that near post run that he loves, I think can just cause Liverpool's back four problems because they'll be caused problems anyway because it's so weak at the moment. So I think that's what I'm really expecting. He trusts McTominay and Fred. I think that's the key thing that we've seen in these big games. He likes to play sort of the screen of McTominay and Fred. And to be fair, it worked more last season, but it does work. So I think that's what I can see happening. But my thoughts about this fixture were that Solskjaer needs a trophy. He really need. There's been this knocked out semi-finals, and. Realistically, we're not going to win the Premier League. The Europa League, I think, is going to be pretty tough as well with the amount of fixtures. And if I'm honest, I'd much rather win the FA Cup than the Europa League. So I think that it should be more of a focus for Manchester United. But then also, there's not really a better way for Liverpool than to start hitting some form when you play Manchester United, your rivals. So I think it's going to be an interesting game because I also think then as well, there's a little bit of, if either team crashes out, I think that's not too much of a loss. I think there's advantages there to be taken from fixture congestion and focusing on the other competitions because we know obviously Liverpool have Leipzig and Manchester United, Real Sociedad. So for both teams, they're tough games coming up in the Europa League and Champions League for them respectively. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I don't know if there's any other FA Cup fixtures that you'd like to focus on or...
I'll have a quick look. Not too sure of this one. The game later, it would have happened by the time this goes out, but Cheltenham Town versus Man City would have been an interesting game, whatever happens. If we look ahead to tomorrow, there's quite a few interesting games, to be fair. Chelsea versus Luton, the 12 o'clock kickoff should be interesting. It depends what kind of team Frank Lampard puts out. That will be a Luton team that will be really, really up for that match. In terms of games that I will not be watching, Fulham versus Burnley will definitely be top of that list. On Monday evening, it's Wycombe Wanderers versus Tottenham Hotspur at Wycombe. It's another really nice draw for Jose Mourinho's team, so that's good for Tottenham. And then the last game of the round takes place Tuesday evening, AFC Bournemouth, a 7 o'clock kickoff on the south coast against Crawley Town. So that's another interesting one because kind of the gap between the two teams. The FA Cup this year is weird because there'll be some teams that really want to be in it and really want to kind of go deep in the competition. There'll be other teams who just look at this as more of a hassle than it usually is. And to throw it back to West Ham briefly, there was talk in the Carabao Cup, kind of during the Carabao Cup run, where the owners weren't particularly happy about it because each Carabao Cup fixture cost, I think, £50,000 to put on. And their view was, well, we're probably not going to win, so why do we want to be in it anyway? I don't think they take the same view of the FA Cup, but there will be teams who think, well, there aren't any supporters. Do we really want to go through this hassle when we could be focusing our resources on the league? So, yeah, the FA Cup's always really interesting, and I love the FA Cup. I think it's kind of one of the best things about English football. The only other FA Cup topic to kind of briefly talk about, I guess, would be Chorley losing 1-0 against Wolves yesterday. I think Chorley put a really good performance in. Just didn't happen for them because of the golfing class. And the only other kind of offshoot topic from that is the fact that the National League North and South has been suspended, which obviously means that Leamington won't be playing for the next couple of weeks too. And I think that shows how important the FA Cup is to these teams because, I mean, Chorley were thought to have won, I think, around £500,000 in prize money and sponsorships from getting to the fourth round. So for teams like that, it's a huge boost, especially kind of during the coronavirus pandemic with no supporters in the stadium.
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree. You know, more than this year, it's been important as ever. So, yeah, I think looking, you know, maybe ahead to the Premier League fixtures, we spoke about Southampton and Arsenal, obviously, almost a replay of the fixture that happened today. But Chelsea versus Wolves, now 2 out of form teams. You know, Chelsea because they're not getting the most of their key players. Wolves because they have a key player missing in Raul Jimenez. Who do you think is going to come away with that one?
I would say probably a draw. I don't think Wolves have been particularly good recently. I mean, my thoughts on Chelsea are well documented in this episode. So, yeah, I think a draw is most likely. Wolves announced the signing of Willian Jose this morning, so that could be interesting to see whether or not he plays. Wolves need to turn this around, really, because they've been in the bottom half for a fair while now. So, yeah, I think Wolves certainly need to kind of get in and amongst it, and I think they will. I think the issue with Wolves has obviously been the fact that they've been without Raul Jimenez following his head injury against Arsenal. So I think a draw. I think neither team is in good form, and I think both teams will be relatively happy with a point. I think Wolves more so than Frank Lampard's Chelsea. Yeah,
no, I completely get that. I think it's a case of maybe not losing so they can individually strike a run. But yeah, definitely Frank Lampard will be more under pressure than Nuno Espirito Santo in that game. So, you know, and I think looking at another game going forward, not necessarily one I'll watch, but Brighton v Fulham. Interesting because it's both teams that are battling relegation and they both actually play some decent football, especially Fulham at the moment. I'd say Fulham maybe look like they have the edge as they actually look like they can put the ball in the back of the net. But, you know, would you say Fulham might be a bit too reliant on Ademola Lookman at the moment?
Yeah, but relegation-threatened teams are always reliant on someone. I think it's kind of the nature of the beast. I think what I would say about this game is that if Brighton beat Fulham, then Fulham have no chance of staying up because this is really a big game for them. If Fulham can't beat the teams directly above them who aren't playing particularly well, I think it's curtains. And I think that would be a shame to see at this point in the season. I think, again, this is the kind of game that's probably going to finish 2-2, where both teams have a real good go, and then there's a crazy goal in kind of the final moments. I think Fulham are in a better headspace than Brighton will be at the moment. I think Brighton will definitely be looking below them in the table. Fulham don't have many places behind them to look at, so they'll definitely be looking up the table. And it's a big game on Wednesday night. I think if Fulham win, it really will scare Brighton. I think it could put Potter under a fair amount of pressure. I had an interesting conversation about Potter the other day, because when he first arrived kind of back in England with Swansea, people were very excited about him kind of following what he'd done in Sweden with Östersund. And people were excited when he got the Brighton job, because it's like, yeah, this English manager who's gone abroad, come back and kind of looks impressive tactically. I'm not sure I've really seen it with Brighton. I'm not really that blown away by it. I think people thought that, yeah, this guy's going to make a huge difference in the dugout, and I don't think he has. I think you compare him with previous Brighton managers and the difference isn't that clear to see. So I'd be interested to hear kind of Ben's thoughts, and perhaps Josh, if he's returned, kind of what do you think of Graham Potter at the moment?
Before that, I should say, full discretion, why on this show people would have seen I was sort of out. There's been a lot of house maintenance where I'm at the moment, and so I'm happy to now report it's finally over, but it was prolonged, and it was unfortunate the timing that happened during the stream. But you two have done superbly. I've been listening throughout the whole thing, and my thoughts on Graham Potter is that I don't know. It's hard to say, and I think you two would agree with me. I get the sense that this Brighton project is a long-term project, and it's sort of year 2. Whether he gets all the time in the world to complete that project is a completely different thing. But I feel like we can see where Brighton are going with this. I sort of see where Tony Bloom, the kind of owner and chairman at the moment, I see where he wants to move Brighton. I think the sort of model to follow, if you two would agree with me, it's sort of the Leicester model, isn't it? From sort of all the way back to when Nigel Pearson kind of got the club out of relegation. I do feel like that's the model mid-table clubs certainly want to take, and whether new ownership is going to be needed at some point, like we've seen with Burnley, maybe that is the case. But you talk about Brighton though. They did make an interesting change at the goalkeeping spot, and it seems to be a permanent one, at least for now, till the end of the season, with Robert Sanchez taking over as the number 1 spot, and Matt Ryan then being allowed to go on loan to Arsenal, which again was a move. And I know you guys talked about the Odegaard mooted signing, obviously not happened yet, but a lot of Arsenal fans were very excited about Odegaard, and then suddenly Matt Ryan's move kind of came up. Ben, Matt Ryan is I think most people would say he's a starting quality keeper who could start for a lot of teams in the Premier League, and he's going to Arsenal to presumably be the number 2. That's a coup for Arsenal, at least for the end of the season, until the end of the season rather.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the deal kind of came out of nowhere as well, which I think credit to Arsenal. I always like transfers that come out of nowhere. I think it's credit to the club and the people surrounding that player who managed to keep that quiet. So I think that was really nicely done there. But yeah, very surprised. I mean, very good to have him as a number 2. I think that's fantastic. If anything did happen to Leno injury-wise, then I think they've got a fantastic keeper there. Quite surprised that Brighton let him go. And obviously the way the transfer came about anyone knowing, kind of seamlessly let him go. So yeah, I was quite surprised, but excellent by Arsenal, and that will be capped off by getting Martin Odegaard. That will be another successful window for them. However, we did talk about how successful I remember the summer window was, and actually that has not been too successful, as we've seen so far this season. So it'll be interesting to see, but yeah, I think Matt Ryan is definitely a guaranteed performer when he plays for them, and it suggests to me, obviously with the Europa League games and things, that they're going to need squad depth, and that's what they've got there with him.
Yeah, Luke, I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on the move, because again, it was one that came out of nowhere. But Ryan, he's not, he's an experienced player. He's played for Valencia in Spain. He's played in the Champions League, so he's definitely got experience. And this will not. I mean, I think Bernd Leno's had actually a very good, solid season, and one could make the case he's probably been Arsenal's player of the season. But this just adds further competition. And granted, if Arsenal wanted to make a Europa League run in the sort of the first part of this year, they could now, with a very capable keeper at that number 2 spot.
Yeah, definitely. I think the reason why this is so kind of out of left field, and kind of partly why it makes sense, is is this. So Arsenal were really unhappy with the backup they brought in the summer from France, Runnison, who's just not kind of the player that Mikel Arteta was hoping he would be. So the idea to bring Ryan in as kind of this backup choice to Leno makes sense to a certain degree. The reason why I don't think this will be a long-term thing is because Arsenal had a similar situation last summer where they had kind of Martinez, who is of course now at Aston Villa, came in, played really, really well and kind of almost cost Leno his place. Arsenal made the decision then to back Leno over Martinez and they sold him to Aston Villa. So Arsenal, for me, aren't looking to run with two goalkeepers who are of a Premier League standard. I think this is just a marriage made out of convenience. I think this is a situation where Brighton, for whatever reason, have decided to go with Robert Sanchez, who, if I'm being totally honest, I hadn't really heard of before he got in the team. I'm looking at his career history now. He's 23 years old. He's been at Brighton since 2013, kind of joining the club from Levante's youth academy. So yeah, it's a really strange move. He'd previously played on loan at Forest Green Rovers and Rochdale. So Brighton are clearly really happy to have this guy in goal, and they clearly believe that he is the future for them between the sticks. So having Matt Ryan go on loan till the end of the season probably makes sense. I don't think he agrees to be a backup goalkeeper in the Premier League. I think there are clubs that would like to have Matt Ryan. Even West Ham, for example, kind of Fabianski is currently 36 years old and is in the final 6 months of his West Ham contract. So there are definitely places where someone like Matt Ryan could land and could play first team football. I just don't think there was a move for him to happen right this second. So yeah, I think a really strange move. As Ben said, it's impressive that they kept it so quiet, and it definitely wasn't the announcement that Arsenal fans were expecting or hoping for. But if it's temporary, I think it's a good move for pretty much everyone involved, especially if Ryan is the keeper to play in the Europa League this year.
Yeah, and sort of having to just to be clear about, obviously people may or may not know I am Australian, and so I have sort of followed this story, and it was made clear in December that he was free to go. He was free to kind of look for a move elsewhere, and so I'm not surprised that this move's come about to Arsenal. Going to Arsenal, I'm surprised that might have happened, and I sort of tweeted about it. It's a bit bittersweet seeing him go, seeing a good goalkeeper go be number 2, but obviously him being at a club at the caliber of Arsenal's level is obviously very exciting, and shades of when Mark Schwarzer was mooted to move to Arsenal. He eventually went to Chelsea. It's a bit poetic that an Australian keeper's eventually made it to the Emirates. Of course, the women's team already have an Australian keeper in Lydia Williams, so and have a very strong Australian contingent there. So just another one there to join the list. I know you guys have talked a lot about the FA Cup. Did you guys have a chance to mention the Villa-Newcastle game tonight? I mean, I don't know. There's much to say on it. I'm guessing we all sort of expect a Villa win. Ben, given the form of the two teams, it does feel like a one-way. It just feel like a disproportionate. Like Villa will probably win, wouldn't they?
Yeah, no, I think definitely Villa probably should be a straightforward win for them. I know they're kind of recovering from COVID, a lot of their players, but I still think they just have this enormous gap in quality there, and especially Newcastle's poor form at the moment. I can't see that being a Newcastle win at all. I think they're in a lot of trouble.
Luke, I imagine you'd agree with that.
Yeah, I spoke about Newcastle a bit earlier. I think they're in quite a lot of trouble under Steve Bruce at the minute, and I think Aston Villa are flying and doing. Perhaps this was the long game from Aston Villa, because obviously they brought in all those players 18 months ago now. They didn't really click last year. They stayed up courtesy of some very kind of faulty goal line technology last year, and now they're flying. So yeah, I think it's good to see from Aston Villa, because it shows that transfers can look to have fouled and then work out a little bit further along the line. So yeah, for me, this is an Aston Villa win. I'd be really, really surprised if it was Newcastle who come away with the points.
Yeah, I feel like most people ask football, like 10 football fans, and probably 10 would say it leans towards a Villa win. So that'll be interesting. I know you guys talked a lot about the Premier League fixtures, so we'll leave that aside. There was an interesting news story that came out this week, and it's maybe a good one to wrap up on. But FIFA kind of made a big put out a statement in regarding the rumors around this European Super League or expanded Champions League, rumors that we've been hearing for a long time. And I know we've sort of discussed what a European Super League, what the consequences would be and how we all feel about it. But FIFA came out and said that they would ban players who were considering taking part or did take part in this European Super League from the World Cup and from FIFA competitions. And I don't think it included the Euros per se. I think because that's not FIFA competition, I don't think it included those. But certainly the World Cup being arguably the pinnacle of football in general, it did feel like a big statement to come out with it. Luke, I know you tweeted about this. What was your reaction? Because obviously it's strange. Oh, it did. Okay, good. And I know you tweeted out about this, and in fact, you've just informed me it did include UEFA competitions. So it did include sort of all international football competitions. What do you make of this? Because it's not, this is all rumor that this Super League's coming about, and yet FIFA felt compelled to make that statement, which is interesting given, do you feel like they're worried? Do you feel like there's a level of concern that kind of got them to make that statement? Because, as we sort of know it, it's rumor, so they could have ignored it if they wanted to, and yet they felt compelled to make that statement.
Yeah, I think FIFA are terrified, to be perfectly honest. I think it's not what they want at all. The reason why I am a little bit skeptical about the statement that FIFA put out, and this was of course in conjunction with each of the 6 regional football confederations too. The reason why I don't really believe them is something like this has happened in the past. There was a really good article in the New York Times by Rory Smith that talks about the Pirate League that happened in Colombia kind of way back in the 20th century, where loads of players basically just went to this unofficial Colombian league, earned loads of money, and then came back to wherever they came from after that. So there is precedent for there to be some kind of anti-FIFA competition going on. And the reason why I think this is such a peculiar situation and why the statement was so odd was because there was a bit in it that kind of referred to how promotion and relegation is integral to kind of sporting credibility, and it's what makes football such an important sport, and it's why there's such a huge pyramid beneath it. The reason why I don't think the argument kind of holds water for FIFA is because they sanction MLS to run as a closed pyramid. There, of course, isn't promotion and relegation in North American soccer, and same applies in Canada as well. And the Canadian Premier League only came about 2 years ago, and that doesn't have relegation either. So the idea that FIFA are trying to kind of balance an anti-Super League argument against the idea that kind of having a Super League would be the downfall of competitive football is a little bit naive, because if this was going to go to like the global sport kind of panel of arbitration, you'd be in a situation where the first thing that the Super League would do is they'd go, well, how comes when the San Jose Earthquakes finish bottom of MLS, they don't get relegated? Why can't we have a Super League in Europe? I think that undermines the credibility of their argument to a great extent. And I don't think if the likes of Barcelona, the likes of Manchester United, etc., were to form a breakaway league, they could afford to exclude players from the World Cup. Because if Messi, Ronaldo, Salah, people like that aren't playing at the World Cup, I'm not sure people want to watch. And we have this conversation about the FA Cup all the time, where people say, well, look, if teams aren't going to play their best players, then are they devaluing the competition? And if FIFA were to exclude their best players, the best players on the planet, from the World Cup, they would certainly be devaluing the competition. So it's a catch-22 situation for FIFA, because if they do nothing, it looks like they're kind of tacitly supporting the move. If they do something like this, they end up in a situation where the things they say don't hold a lot of weight. So I think we're heading towards some big shift in football. I'm just not sure the Super League is going to be the thing that kind of is the major shift. And we see shifts all the time, like the Bosman ruling, kind of the offside rule. Football changes all the time, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
Yeah, and Ben, we've talked about what the impact of a European Super League could do, and how if we liked it or not. I don't think the majority of us did, but then this statement comes out, and now I put it to you: who looks stronger in this scenario? Who looks like? Do the clubs look like they have the power because now FIFA's sort of put out this statement and said, don't do this, or we will have to do this? Is it now on the clubs, or is the power with FIFA? Because now that they've sort of stepped in, have they done enough to deter the clubs and players from thinking about this? I mean, I don't know what your reaction is, or I'm curious to know whose position do you feel like who's in a stronger position between the clubs or FIFA themselves?
I mean, when this statement came out, it was a bold statement, and I think you were shocked, and then part of me was just like, that's it's credible that they've come out and they're trying to release a bold statement, but it also like Luke said, it does give a feeling of kind of nervous and they're a little bit desperate. I always think football's now just in a game where whoever's got money has the power, and therefore I think the clubs have the power ultimately. I think we see with all the financial fair play issues in football. We saw with I think the coronavirus and the pandemic and the lack of help for grassroots clubs and things like that. I think we've really it's exposed some ugly moments in football, and I think that's there here again. I believe that the clubs will have the power ultimately, because they're the ones who will pay the players the big wages. If they pay the players the big wages, then I believe that the players will, like Luke said, won't play in the World Cup, and they'll be fine. And then all of a sudden, who's going to want to watch the World Cup because it's got barely any players in it? So I think because the clubs are the one who support the players, and I think really for the past 20 years, it's kind of been I've listened to a lot of podcasts of former players, and they've all said international football's had the back foot on club football. So I think to that extent, coming out and making that statement about club football, about international football, sorry, it is almost for most players, I think it's just a given that it's in the back seat. People want to go and achieve with clubs, and I think that was really in England definitely first created by Manchester United and Liverpool. You see the likes of Roy Keane and Jamie Carragher quite openly say that international football sat way back for them, and it was all about their teams. So I think to that extent, because basically to summarise, because the clubs pay the wages, and Super League, they'd be able to maybe increase wages, it means that the clubs are in control.
Yeah, it does feel like that, and it was just it does feel like it's still the onus is still on the clubs. But it was very interesting to hear sort of the world governing body feel the need to respond to speculation, unless maybe they know something more than the public do. Maybe the formation of a European Super League is a lot closer than a lot of us realize. Maybe that's why they felt they need to come out with a statement. But it's an interesting one, and it'll be one to monitor, I guess, as the calendar goes on, and especially with the scheduling at the moment, the 2022 World Cup obviously being a winter World Cup, and games still having to be played to make sure that World Cup window still happens, and you wonder if there'll be a delay or anything like that in months to come. But I don't know. I mean, is there any sort of story that coming out of continental Europe or around the world that I know that anyone wants to discuss? I know, for example, and maybe Ben, I'll ask you about this one in particular. Real Madrid they lost to a third division team in the Copa del Rey. Zidane is under a lot of pressure. There are people like Guillem Balaguer reporting that Madrid may see this as Zidane's sort of last season. He might be on the way out. See, Sergio Ramos has not signed a deal yet. We don't know. Speculation is links him with a move to England. I don't know if he'll want to do that or not, but he looks like he might be on his way out. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Real Madrid, because we were discussing, they won the league last year, and they seem to be sort of robust, a solid team. They weren't exactly wowing everyone, but still got the job done on their star quality. And now, do you feel like Real Madrid, are you surprised that they are starting to decline, or is this, and that they're sort of being caught between keeping the likes of Ramos and trying to push for young players, or is this sort of just part of how the evolution of the game, and just that they have now reached a crossroads where they're going to have to start to evolve as well?
I think when I think of the last 10 years, I think, yeah, I'm surprised that they're declining. But then I just look at a team sheet and I'm like, actually, you know what? I can see why they're losing games. I'm like a front three of Vinicius, Benzema, and Rodrigo. That's just not strong enough. And I know there are players there for the potential, and Benzema's been a great servant to the club and I'm actually a big fan of Benzema, but that's just not a Real Madrid front three, and that's far from it. You know, you see Eden Hazard, you know, he's had his injury problems, but he's coming back in. He's still not playing the way Eden Hazard plays, and, you know, he really needs to find form quick because he's running out of time because of his age. So I think that in that sense, yeah, they are looking in trouble. You know, they have possibly a duo in midfield that has been the most reliant and performing duo over, you know, the past decade, in Toni Kroos and Luka Modric. They've been fantastic together. They're starting to get older, so they're going to need some other players. You know, I struggle to work out what they're doing, because I think every time I think they're focusing on youth, they're just about to learn out Martin Odegaard. So I don't understand why you wouldn't have been giving him more game time. You know, Militao, he hasn't played too much. Regarding Sergio Ramos, I think he'll just sign a new deal. I got unbelievably excited a couple of summers ago when I thought he was going to come to Manchester United, but it was just to get a new contract. So I could see that being there, but because I know his allegiance is to Real Madrid. So I just struggle to see the plan with Real Madrid, really, because I think their recruitment hasn't been that bad. Like, I don't think it's been good, but I don't think it's been bad, really. And that really summed up, like you said, their season last season. You know, they had a good season. Obviously, they won the Liga, but they never like you said, they never wowed me. You know, I think they probably won it due to other teams not being so strong. So I think, you know, Zidane's in trouble because they have spent quite a bit of money. But I also think I look at that team and I just do think, like, compared to the Real Madrid a couple of years ago, you know, with Ronaldo and with Bale when he played, it's just not strong. It's not as strong as it was, and I think that's an issue for Real Madrid as a whole. If they do sack Zidane, which I think they will, they are going to need to start again with the next manager they get in and start backing him so it's going to be expensive for Real Madrid, but they have the funds. But I think Zidane will be sacked eventually. Yeah. I don't know if Josh is there.
We'll assume not. So I'll come in briefly on Madrid, and we'll see when Josh is here. Hey, I think the Real Madrid situation for Zidane is pretty bleak in all honesty. I think Zidane.
Yeah, apologies. My audio's on delay.
I think Zidane is in trouble, and I don't think he's going to be there for much longer, even if he does get to the end of the season. The league that I wanted to talk about briefly, kind of as an alternative to English football that we often focus on, is the fact that Rangers are so far clear at the top of the Scottish Premiership. So after 25 games, they have won 22, drawn 3, and currently sit on a positive 58 goal difference. That puts them on 69 points. Celtic have played 22, they've won 13, they've drawn 7, and they have lost 2. So currently they're on 30 goal difference and 46 points. If they win each of their games in hand, which isn't a certainty, kind of if you look at their form this season, that would put them on 55 points. They would still be 14 points behind Rangers after 25 games in the Scottish Premiership. And I think just basically the thing I wanted to say about this is that Steven Gerrard is going to be the best manager out of kind of the new crop of managers from kind of previous England teams. I think he's shown himself to be kind of a more astute motivator, a better tactician than Frank Lampard, for example. And I think it'll be quite interesting to see how Wayne Rooney gets on at Derby, and perhaps even more interesting to see how Phil Neville does over with Inter Miami in MLS. I think that's an interesting appointment, to say the least.
I think I'm back. There we go. Slight hiccup. Just at the end, the internet just comes back to bite me. It's been, but yes, it's interesting. And I mean, I don't know how closely you guys have been following the Celtic situation, but Neil Lennon's been under fire a lot recently, given there's sort of a staleness to Celtic at the moment. Obviously, they made a trip to Dubai, an off-season trip. Granted, a lot of the WSL teams obviously made trips. Players went to Dubai as well. And, seems like teams have gone to Dubai have sort of had criticism, and rightly so, for traveling under pandemic. But Celtic certainly have had that as well. And I don't know. It's very interesting to see if this is sort of the end of their reign and if Rangers are primed to take over. Luke, I mean, you sort of alluded to it there. Is there sort of a changing of the guard ready to happen in Glasgow at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. I think Celtic, the wheels have just completely fallen off for Neil Lennon, and I think it was inevitable that this was going to be the case, because Lennon was someone who, after he managed Celtic, went to Bolton, which isn't a huge vote of confidence for someone who had managed in the Champions League previously. And I just look at it, and since his return to the club, they've just gone backwards, especially, of course, since Brendan Rodgers left kind of a couple of seasons ago. And I think the reason for this is Lennon lacks the tactical and kind of philosophical approach that we saw under Lennon. I think he's just not of the same quality manager. So I think regression was inevitable. And if you look at the standings now and you look at the situation that Celtic put themselves in, they kind of risked the future of the season kind of in Scotland. Kind of Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, was absolutely furious that they did go to Dubai. And the other thing to remember as well about what they did is they took the whole squad to Dubai, including an injured player who, of course, couldn't participate in the warm weather training. And then it was the injured player whose name I don't have kind of off the top of my head at the moment, then was the reason why so many of their players, 14, had to self-isolate upon their return. And I'm not blaming the player in particular. It's obviously not their fault. The issue that I have with the trip to Dubai is it kind of speaks to the whole level of mismanagement that's happening at Celtic Park at the moment. It just speaks to the whole situation where this should have been quite a simple season for Celtic. They should have just continued to do what they were doing. And instead, Christopher Julian was the player who was injured and went over to Dubai. And yeah, I just think Celtic, it's just disappointing for Celtic fans and for people who like to see a close title race, because Rangers have been fighting back under a number of seasons and they get to the point where they're ready to challenge, and then Celtic just completely fall away. So yeah, I think definitely a changing of the guard in Scotland this season.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, just to wrap up, I mean, what are your thoughts on Steven Gerrard at the moment and the job he's done at Rangers? Are you impressed? And what have you made of his managerial tenure so far?
No, I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed. You know, he was always a professional, everyone said, throughout his career, and he looks like he's done a fantastic job. I think the most interesting thing for me is you know, where's he going to go after this? You know, is he going to be the successor to Jurgen Klopp? Because you know, we think, or Klopp said, you know, probably going to have a gap, rest from football after this current contract. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he goes after that. Does he want to manage another team in the Premier League? Not too sure. You know, he's obviously incredibly loyal to Liverpool. So that's the most interesting thing with me, because what he's proved is, I think he's definitely capable. He's more than capable of managing in the Premier League or in another one of the big leagues. I think you know, maybe he needs a gap of a mid-table side before, you know, I'd see like him suiting a Southampton or something like that. But it's just whether he wants to, because he's spoken like quite openly about his loyalties to Liverpool and you know, the prospect of managing another team in the Premier League is, he said, is an uncertain decision. You wouldn't really know what to do. So it'll be interesting to see. But you know, as of now, he's doing a fantastic job with Rangers, and you know, there's no reason why he can't stick around there for a few years and try and create a bit of a dynasty as Celtic have created over many years. So yeah, I think it's an incredible job, and I think Rangers fans will always be grateful for him. Obviously, and it looks looking likely, he brings home the title for them. I think we may have lost Josh again.
Yeah, it appears so. He's back. There we go. On a delay, of course, but he's coming is the most important thing.
Yeah.
As Josh isn't here, I'll fill some dead air with some thoughts about kind of the Phil Neville appointment and what that means for the Lionesses kind of throughout the end of the year. I think it's a really big shame that Phil Neville decided to leave kind of halfway through his tenure, kind of before the end of his contract and the Euros and the World Cup, not the World Cup, the Olympics that's coming up for Team GB as well. I think it was a strange decision. I think the recruitment process from Inter Miami was a little bit odd in the sense that it kind of came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere, but Phil Neville was always going to be the choice, which doesn't kind of indicate that particularly thorough research went on, which was something that David Beckham disputed kind of heavily at the press conference yesterday. For the Lionesses, though, I think this gives them a good chance to regroup and to look to the future. Of course, the new manager is coming in after the Olympic Games in the summer. And I think, just to appraise Neville's reign briefly, I think after the first couple of years or first couple of months in the job, I think he got to the stage where he kind of felt like he was above it a little bit, and he seemed a little bit arrogant. And at first, the players were almost in awe of him, and I think it worked really well because it was like, wow, Phil Neville's here is going to really change the game. And then we got further and further through his kind of managerial tenure with the English national team, and it just was a little bit vanilla and a little bit like, well, is this it? And I think it's good for the Lionesses that they can now move on to a new post-Phil Neville era. I think it was great for the team's exposure, and I think the players will definitely have learned something from the experience. So hopefully going forwards, and especially with Team GB in the summer, hopefully it can kind of point to a brighter future. And I'd be interested to see what kind of the new interim management team can do between now and, as I say, the Olympic Games.
Yeah, I think Josh is still not back. So, Am
I back? Just curious on the screen. Okay, I see nods. I'm going to assume.
We can hear you, but we can't.
We can hear you, but it's just a black screen.
He's gone again.
Yeah. Luckily, this can be edited. So.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I didn't even need to ad lib.
That's what I was thinking. I'm gonna have to dip into the memory of the French league now or something.
Yeah.
All right, I'm assuming.
Oh, you're back.
You're back.
All right, I assume I'm back now. Am I back now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Trying to bring the conversation full circle. Do you guys? Just to wrap up, because we've talked about obviously Lampard, and you talk about Gerrard and where he'll go next, Ben. Obviously, Lampard made a jump from Derby to Chelsea that now hindsight, we look back and think maybe that was too big a jump. See, Phil Neville took on the England women's job, which it's a high profile role. Maybe not it's certainly one that attracts a lot of attention, and he had a mixed result there. Now he's gone into Miami, I guess, maybe develop his skills further. Do you guys, just to wrap up, do you have a manager that you really like who's obviously an ex-player manager at the moment? Is there one that you sort of look at? Is it, and Luke, maybe you allude to, maybe it is Steven Gerrard. Is there one that stands out to you as having the sort of best future or outlook at the moment?
If we're talking about kind of ex-England players, then yeah, for me it's Steven Gerrard. If I can throw out a niche MLS reference, it's 100% Jesse Marsch is going to be the defining manager of the 2020s, hopefully.
Of course. Ben, is there one that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think I've got to be boring. I'm just going to have to agree with Steven Gerrard. I think out of all of them, he probably just looks the most competent. I think there's, even if it's not English, but if you bring in Solskjaer, I know he's doing a good job, but there's still, a lot of doubts to the job he's doing there. So I think Steven Gerrard definitely looks the most assured. And I think, once he brings home that silverware for certain, that'll definitely put his name high above the others.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens if he can. And Rangers look like they'll win the title, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. And obviously, opinions on Arteta, Lampard, Solskjaer, as we know, week to week they change drastically based on results. So we'll see what happens if any of them do. But my thanks to you two for basically hosting the show. I feel like a guest. I feel like I've been a guest in my own show here. Ben Parkinson, sports deputy, Luke James, editor of the sports section of The Ball. Thank you so much for both coming on. We will hopefully be back live next week with the Quaran-Stream, internet permitting and house maintenance permitting. But until then, obviously, Wednesday we have our midweek show, so check those out. And we'll be back sometime soon. So thank you for watching.